The war had been going badly for a long time. 17 battles, 17 defeats. The Galactic Coalition, an alliance of 12 spacefaring species, was dying. Slowly, every week brought news of another world falling to the Voreth Dominion, and every week the hope grew. Smaller, Commander Jake Lawson stood on the bridge of his ship, the Resolute. Dawn, watching the stars through the main viewport. He was a tall man with tired eyes and a jaw that looked like it had been carved from stone. 5 years ago, humanity had joined the coalition. 5 years of being told they were too young, too primitive, too inexperienced to matter. The other species had been traveling between stars for thousands of years. Humans had barely left their own solar system. "Commander, we're receiving a distress signal," said Lieutenant Megan Torres from her station. She was his tactical officer. Woman with sharp eyes and an even sharper mind. "It's coming from the Cathari home world. The Voreth are attacking." Lawson turned quickly. The Cathari were one of the oldest members of the coalition. Their world held billions of lives. "What forces do we have nearby?" "Just us, sir, and the Carolina Tours." Pulled up the tactical display. "The main coalition fleet is 3 days away." 3 days. The Voreth would turn the entire planet to ash in 3 days. "Orders from coalition command are coming through," said the communications officer. "They want us to retreat to safe distance and observe. They say 2 human ships cannot make a difference against a Voreth assault fleet." Lawson was quiet. For a long moment, on the display he could see the enemy ships surrounding the Cathari world like wolves around wounded prey. He could see the evacuation transports trying to escape, carrying millions of civilians. He could see them being destroyed one by one. "How many evacuation ships are there?" he asked. "Over 200, sir, but they won't make it. The Voreth are cutting them off." Lawson looked at his crew. They were young. Most of them had never seen real combat. They had families back on Earth, lives they wanted to return to. He had no right to ask them to die, but he also knew what kind of man he wanted to be. "Set a course for the Cathari home world," he said. "Maximum speed." Torres did not hesitate. "Yes, sir." The Resolute, Dawn and the Carolina jumped into the battle like 2 small stones thrown into a raging ocean. The Voreth fleet was massive, over 300 warships, each one bristling with weapons. The 2 human vessels were outgunned, outmatched, and completely alone, but they fought anyway. Ambassador Vorin watched from the surface of his dying world. He was Keith, a tall insectoid being with 4 arms and compound eyes that could see in every direction at once. For 300 years he had served his people as a diplomat. He had met species from across the galaxy. He had seen courage and cowardice, honor and betrayal. He had never seen anything like the humans. The 2 small ships dove straight into the heart of the Voreth formation. They twisted and turned, their weapons firing constantly, drawing the attention of the enemy away from the evacuation transports. The Voreth were confused. This made no sense. 2 ships against 300. It was suicide. It was madness. Hour after hour the humans fought. Their shields failed. Their hull was torn open. Crew members died at their stations, and still they would not stop. Still they would not run. "Why?" Vorin whispered, watching the battle unfold on his screens. "Why do they do this on the bridge of the Resolute?" Dawn fire burned in 3 sections. The air was thick with smoke. Half the crew was dead or wounded. Megan Torres had blood running down her face from a cut on her forehead, but she was still at her station, still fighting. Shields are gone, she reported. Hull integrity at 30%. We have maybe an hour before complete structural failure. Lawson gripped the arms of his command chair. His ship was dying. His people were dying. But on the tactical display he could see something beautiful: the evacuation. Transports were escaping. One by one, they were jumping to safety. Millions of Cathari lives saved. Then we have an hour, he said. Keep fighting. The Carolina was the first to fall. Captain Maria Santos, a woman from a small town in Texas who had dreamed of the stars since childhood, gave the order to ram her crippled ship into a Vorath destroyer. The explosion took out 3 enemy vessels and created a gap in their formation. The resolute Dawn held the line alone 9 hours. For 9 hours, a single human ship stood between the Vorath and the fleeing civilians. When coalition reinforcements finally arrived, they found the resolute Dawn drifting in space, more wreckage than ship power was failing. Life support was barely working. Of the crew of 400, only 87 were still alive, but behind them empty space. The evacuation transports were gone. Safe. Ambassador Voron was on the first shuttle to reach the resolute Dawn. He walked through the ruined corridors, stepping over debris and bodies until he found the bridge. Commander Lawson was still in his chair, barely conscious, his uniform soaked with blood from a wound in his side. Voron had lived for 3 centuries. He had met kings and emperors, warriors and scholars. He had never knelt before anyone. He knelt now. The Cathari ambassador, representative of one of the oldest civilizations in the galaxy, lowered himself to the deck before this young, wounded human around him. The surviving crew watched in stunned silence. What are you doing? Lawson asked weakly. Voron looked up at him with his compound eyes. In Cathari culture, to kneel was the highest form of respect. It was reserved for those who had proven themselves beyond all doubt, beyond all question. Your kind burns like dying stars, Voron said softly, brief but impossibly bright. Today you have taught me something, Commander. You have taught me that courage is not the absence of fear, it is the choice to act. When fear tells you to run. He reached out and took Lawson's hand, a human gesture he had learned but never used. The Cathari will not forget this day. The galaxy will not forget. You came for us when no one else would. You stood for us when standing meant death. Lawson managed a small smile. That's what humans do, Ambassador. We stand for each other, and now we stand for you too. Word of the battle spread across the coalition like wildfire. 2 human ships against 300. 9 hours of impossible resistance. Millions of lives saved. The species who had dismissed humanity as primitive newcomers began to whisper different words. Words like courage, words like honor, words like hope. The war was far from over. The Vorath were still coming, still hungry, still deadly, but something had changed. For the first time in 17 defeats, the coalition had a reason to believe, and it had come from the youngest species in the galaxy. 3 months had passed since the battle. At the Cathari home world, the war had changed. Humans were no longer observers, they were fighters now. standing shoulder to shoulder with species who had doubted them. Sergeant Kyle Bennett dropped into the mud of Enthara Prime and crawled forward through the rain. He was 42 years old, had been a soldier for 20 of those years, and had seen more combat than most people could imagine, but nothing had prepared him for this war. The Voreth were unlike any enemy humanity had faced, part machine, part organic. They felt no pain and knew no fear. They did not surrender. They did not retreat. They simply kept coming until everything in front of them was dead. Sergeant, we've got movement on the ridge, whispered Corporal Danielle Price from beside him. She was the squad's medic, a small woman with steady hands and a heart bigger than her body. Bennett peered through his scope. Ridge was crawling with Voreth soldiers, their metallic bodies glistening in the rain. Beyond them was the Coalition forward base, and beyond that the civilian settlement they were trying to protect. How many wounded do we have at the base? He asked. 47 humans, 31 Valorans, a dozen Cathari. Then we hold this position until they're evacuated. Private Aaron Marsh, the youngest member of the squad, swallowed hard. He was 19 years old and had been on Netha Prime for only 2 weeks. Sergeant, there must be 500 Voreth on that ridge. We're only 12. Bennett turned to look at him. Then I guess each of us needs to take out about 40 of them. The attack came at dawn. The Voreth advanced like a wave of steel and hatred. Bennett's squad opened fire, their weapons cutting down the first ranks, but more kept coming. Always more. Zelthra watched from a position 50 to the left. She was a Valoran warrior, tall and slender with skin like polished silver. Her people had been fighting wars for 10,000 years. They were considered the finest soldiers in the Coalition, but she had never seen anything like the humans. A plasma bolt struck Sergeant Bennett in the shoulder. The wound was severe. Zelthra could see bone through the torn flesh. Any Valoran would have collapsed from the shock. Any Cathari would have lost consciousness. Bennett roared in pain, slammed a medical patch onto the wound, and kept firing. How is this possible? Zelthra whispered to herself. She watched as Corporal Price dragged a wounded Valoran soldier to safety, her own leg bleeding from a shrapnel wound. She watched as Private Marsh, his hands shaking with terror, held his position and kept shooting. She watched humans take injuries that should have killed them and continue fighting as if death itself was afraid to claim them. The battle lasted 4 hours. When it was over, the ridge was covered with Voreth bodies. The Coalition base was safe. The civilians were evacuated. Of Bennett's 12-soldier squad, 4 were dead and 6 were wounded. Only Bennett and Price were still on their feet, and both were bleeding from multiple wounds. Zelthra approached them slowly. She did not understand what she had witnessed. In her culture, a wounded warrior was expected to withdraw and seek healing. Fighting through pain was considered foolish, a waste of resources. Why did you not retreat? She asked Bennett. Your injuries were severe. You should have fallen back. Bennett was sitting on a broken piece of equipment, letting Price bandage his shoulder. He looked up at the Valoran with tired eyes. Because if we fell back, the Voreth would have reached the base. People would have died, but you could have died. Your soldiers did die. Yeah. Bennett's voice was heavy with grief. They did, and I'll carry that weight for the rest of my life. But the people at that base are alive because of what we That's what matters. Zelthra did not understand. Is this a human concept? Valuing other lives more than your own. Price finished the bandage and looked up. No, it's not just a human concept. But maybe we're just better at ignoring the voice that tells us to run. The squad was cut off for 11 days. A Vorath counterattack destroyed the coalition communications array, and suddenly Bennett's people were alone behind enemy lines. They had limited ammunition, limited food, and limited medical supplies. They should have surrendered. They should have hidden. They should have done anything except what they did. They fought every night. They struck Vorath supply lines. Every day they moved to a new position, staying one step ahead of the enemy patrols. Private Marsh, the nervous young man who had been terrified on his first day, became a skilled fighter. Corporal Price kept everyone alive with medical skills that seemed like magic, and when they finally discovered a Vorath command node facility that controlled enemy forces across the entire sector, Bennett made a decision. We can't take it with a direct assault, he said, looking at his exhausted soldiers, but if we can destroy it, we can. There operations in this whole region. Marsh looked at the facility. It was heavily guarded. Getting in would be almost impossible. Getting out would be completely impossible. I'll do it, he said quietly. Everyone turned to look at him. I'm the fastest. I know explosives. I can get in, set the charges, and he didn't finish the sentence. He didn't need to. Bennett shook his head. No, I won't order you to do that. You're not ordering me, Sergeant. I'm volunteering. Marsh's voice was steady now, all traces of fear gone. If I don't do this, how many more people will die? How many more squads will get cut off like we did that night? Aaron Marsh ran toward the Vorath command node while his squadmates provided covering fire. He made it inside. He planted the explosives. The explosion lit up the sky like a second sun. Marsh did not come out. 3 days later, coalition forces broke through the Vorath lines and found Bennett's squad. Only 5 of them were still alive. They had been fighting for 11 days with no support, no supplies, and no hope of rescue. Zelthra was part of the rescue force. When she saw Bennett still standing despite wounds that would have killed any Valoran, she understood something she had never understood before. She understood why the humans were winning that night. As the survivors were evacuated, Zelthra made a choice. She picked up Sergeant Bennett, who had finally collapsed from exhaustion and blood loss, and carried him to the medical transport herself. Another Valoran asked her why she would do such a thing, why she would lower herself to carry a member of another species. Zelthra looked at her comrade with silver eyes that had seen too much death and finally understood the meaning of courage, because that is what humans would do, she said. Word spread through the coalition forces. Stories of human endurance, stories of human sacrifice, stories of Private Aaron Marsh, 19 years old, who gave his life so that others could live. The Vorath were still winning. The war was still desperate. But something was changing in the hearts of the coalition soldiers. They were learning to fight like humans. The war had entered its 2nd year, and humanity had become the heart of the coalition's military. Admiral Vanessa Cole stood before the massive holographic display in Coalition Command, watching the battle lines shift across 1,000 star systems. She was 53 years old with gray streaks in her dark hair and lines on her face that told the story of too many sleepless nights. 6 months ago she had been promoted to represent humanity on the Coalition High Council. It was an honor that had never been given to such a young species before. It was also a burden that grew heavier every day. The intelligence is confirmed, said Grand Marshal Kethavan, his insected form towering beside her. He was the supreme commander of all coalition forces. Ancient even by Cathari standards, the Voreth central mind is located in the Voron system. If we destroy it, we destroy their ability to coordinate. Across the galaxy, Cole studied the display. The Voron system was deep in enemy territory, protected by the largest Voreth fleet ever assembled. Getting there would cost thousands of ships. Getting out would cost thousands more. What are our chances of success? She asked. The Grand Marshal was silent. For a long moment, our analysts estimate 12%, 12%. That meant 88% chance of failure, of death, of losing everything. The human fleet will lead the vanguard, Cole said. Every head in the command center turned toward her. Even Kethavan seemed surprised. Admiral, he said slowly, the vanguard will face the heaviest resistance. Casualties will be. I know what the casualties will be. Cole's voice was steady, but her hands trembled slightly at her sides. I know exactly what I'm asking my people to do, but if we don't take this chance, the Voreth will keep coming. They'll destroy world after world until there's nothing left. Humanity didn't join this coalition to watch from the sidelines while others fight and die. We joined to stand with you. The Grand Marshal looked at her. For a long time, in 300 years of warfare, he had met many commanders. He had seen courage and cowardice, wisdom and foolishness. He had never met anyone quite like the humans. Very well, he said finally, the human fleet will lead. Captain Derek Tanner received his orders aboard the carrier New Horizons. He was a quiet man, the kind of person who listened more than he talked. His crew loved him because he treated every single one of them like family. Now he was being asked to lead them into almost certain death. The mission is simple, Admiral Cole told him via secure communication. Your ship will carry a strike team directly to the central mines' location. Dr. Nathan Reyes has discovered a weakness in the Voreth. They're vulnerable to a specific radiation frequency. If we can detonate a reactor core at close range to the central mine, the resulting radiation burst should destroy it. Tanner understood immediately. Detonate a reactor core at close range. That means the ship delivering the strike won't survive. No, Captain, it won't. There was silence between them. Through the viewport, Tanner could see his crew moving through the corridors of his ship, young men and women who had trusted him with their lives. My crew will evacuate before the final approach. You'll pilot the ship alone for the last phase. Tanner nodded slowly. When do we leave? 48 hours. He spent those 48 hours walking through his ship, talking to his crew. He ate meals with them. He listened to their stories about home, about family, about the lives they wanted to live when the war was over. He did not tell them what was coming. He didn't have to. They were soldiers. They knew. On the night before departure, Lieutenant Chris Novick found Tanner standing alone on the observation deck. Captain, may I speak freely? Always. Lieutenant, Novik was young, barely 25. But he had proven himself in a dozen battles. I know what this mission really means, sir. I know you're planning to stay aboard for the final approach. Tanner said nothing. I want you to know that when the time comes, I'm staying with you, Lieutenant. That's not, sir. With respect, you can't operate the reactor controls and pilot the ship at the same time, not alone. You need someone to make sure the detonation happens. Novik's voice was calm, certain. I don't have family back home, no wife, no kids. You have a daughter. Tanner turned to look at the young man. There were tears in his eyes. Chris, let me do this, sir. Let me matter. Across the fleet, similar conversations were happening. Soldiers writing letters home, officers making peace with their fate, lovers saying goodbye, parents recording messages for children who might never see them again. Dr. Nathan Reyes worked through the night refining his calculations. He was a scientist, not a soldier, but he understood what his discovery meant. He understood the cost, the radiation frequency has to be precise. He told Captain Tanner, too high in it won't penetrate the central mines. Shielding too low and it won't cause enough damage. The margin for error is less than 1%. Can it be done? Reyes looked at him. Yes, if the reactor core is detonated at exactly the right distance at exactly the right moment, it will work. Then we'll make it work. Grand Marshal Kethoven addressed the combined fleet on the eve of the battle. His image appeared on every screen in every ship across hundreds of vessels from a dozen different species. Tomorrow we go to war, he said. Many of us will not return. I will not lie to you about that. The enemy is strong. The enemy is waiting. The odds are against us. He paused, his compound eyes sweeping across the faces of his soldiers. 5 years ago, a young species joined our coalition. We dismissed them. We thought them primitive. We thought them weak. We were wrong. Images appeared behind him. Resolute Dawn holding the line at the Cathari home world. Sergeant Bennett's squad fighting for 11 days behind enemy lines. Private Aaron Marsh running towards certain death to save others. The humans have taught us something we had forgotten. They have reminded us what courage truly means, not the absence of fear, but the choice to act despite it, not the hope of victory, but the refusal to accept defeat. His voice grew stronger. Tomorrow we fight beside them. Tomorrow we show the Voreth what the coalition has become, not just an alliance of convenience, but a family. Family that protects its own. Admiral Cole watched the speech from her command ship around her. Officers wept openly, not from fear, but from something deeper, from pride, from love. Grand Marshal, she said quietly, you honor us. On the bridge of the Resolute Dawn, Commander Jake Lawson, now fully healed from his wounds, stood ready. Beside him, Lieutenant Megan Torres ran final checks on their weapon systems. This is it, she said. Everything we've fought for comes down to tomorrow. Lawson nodded. Are you afraid? Torres was quiet for a moment. Yes, but I'm more afraid of what happens if we don't try. Outside the viewport, the fleet assembled. Human ships, Valoran ships, Cathari ships, vessels from a dozen different worlds, all pointed in the same direction, toward the enemy, toward the end of everything, or the beginning of something new. Lawson turned to his crew. They were watching him, waiting. Whatever happens tomorrow, he said, I want you all to know something. It has been the greatest honor of my life to serve with you, not because we're human, but because we're fighting for something bigger than ourselves. He looked out at the stars. Let's go show them what that means. The Voran system burned with the light of 1,000 dying ships. The coalition fleet emerged from faster than light travel in perfect formation. For one brief moment there was silence. Then the Vorath opened fire and the universe became chaos. Commander Jake Lawson gripped his command chair as the resolute Dawn shook under enemy fire. Around him, his crew worked with desperate efficiency. Every second, a matter of life and death. Status report, he shouted over the alarms. Lieutenant Megan Torres looked up from her tactical display, her face lit by the glow of battle data. Vorath fleet is engaging across all fronts. We're taking heavy casualties on the left flank. The Valoran heavy cruisers are trying to punch through, but they're being overwhelmed. On the display, Lawson could see the scope of the carnage, ships vanishing in balls of fire, escape pods tumbling through space, the darkness of the void filled with debris and death. Get me a line to the Valoran flagship, he ordered. We're moving to support their position. On the resolute Dawn dove into the heart of the battle. This was different from their last stand at the Cathari home world. This time they were not alone. This time they were part of something larger. Human ships fought beside Valoran warships. Kiri battle cruisers covered the advance of smaller coalition vessels. Species that had once viewed each other as strangers now fought as brothers, and at the center of it all, humanity led the way. The vanguard took the worst of it, the human fleet, positioned at the front of the formation, absorbed wave after wave of Vorath attack. Ships exploded, crews died, but the line held. 40% of the vanguard is gone, Torres reported, her voice tight with emotion. Captain Santos of the Houston is requesting permission to ram his crippled ship into the Vorath defensive line. Lawson closed his eyes. For just a moment, Captain Santos was a good man, a friend. Does he have any other options? No, sir. His engines are destroyed. His weapons are offline. He's dead in space. Then tell him, Lawson paused, searching for the words. Tell him we'll see him on the other side. The Houston accelerated toward the Vorath line on emergency thrusters. Its collision tore through 3 enemy warships and created a gap in their formation. Seconds later, coalition ships poured through the opening, pushing deeper into enemy territory. On the ground, the fighting was even more brutal. Zelthra led a combined force of Valoran and human marines against the Vorath ground installations. She had changed in the month since meeting Sergeant Bennett. She no longer questioned human tactics. She embraced them. Push forward, she shouted, her silver form moving through the chaos like a dancer. Do not give them time to regroup. Beside her, human soldiers advanced through enemy fire. They were singing, actually singing battle songs from their home world, songs about courage and sacrifice and never giving up. When she had first heard humans sing in battle, Zelthra had thought they were mad. Now she understood. The songs were not for the enemy, they were for themselves. They were a way of saying, we are still here, we are still fighting, we are still alive. She found herself humming along. In orbit, the new horizons pushed through the chaos toward its target. Captain Derek Tanner stood at the helm, watching as his crew evacuated to escape pods, one by one. They said goodbye, some saluted, some wept, some simply nodded. Warrior 2. Warrior Captain, his first officer, said, the last pods are away. It's just you and Lieutenant Novik now. Tanner looked at the young man who had refused to leave. Novik sat at the reactor control station, calm as stone. Chris, there's still time. You can take the last pod. Novik shook his head. We've been over this, sir. You need me here. And I want to be part of something that matters. The New Horizons broke through the last line of Voreth defenders and saw its target. The central mind was massive, a space station the size of a small moon, pulsing with dark energy. Cables and conduits spread from it like veins, connecting it to the Voreth fleet, coordinating their every move. Reactor status, Tanner asked. Primed and ready. We need to get within 500 m for the radiation frequency to penetrate their shielding. 500 m. At that range, there would be no escape. Tanner looked at the central mind. Inside that station was the intelligence that had ordered the deaths of billions, the mind that had launched this war of extermination. Take us in, he said. The New Horizons accelerated. Voreth defenders swarmed around them. Weapons fire tore into the hull. Systems failed. Fires erupted, but the ship kept moving, kept pushing forward, refusing to stop. 3,000 m. Novik reported. 200. 1,000. An explosion rocked the ship. Tanner was thrown from his chair. When he looked up, he saw that the navigation console was destroyed. Manual control, he gasped, pulling himself to a secondary station. We do this the old-fashioned way. His hands moved across the controls. The ship lurched and spun, but he held it together through sheer force of will. 500 m. Novik shouted. We're in range. Tanner looked at the central mind, filling the viewport. He thought of his daughter back on Earth. He thought of all the people who would live because of what happened in the next few seconds. Chris, do it now. Novik activated the reactor overload. The ship began to shake as the core built toward critical mass. 30 seconds to detonation, he said. 20 seconds. 10. Captain Derek Tanner closed his eyes. It's been an honor, Lieutenant. The honor was mine, sir. The New Horizons exploded. The radiation burst tore through the central mind like a hurricane through paper. For one infinite moment, the station tried to hold together. Then it came apart, dissolving into fire and light and silence across the galaxy. Voreth forces stopped moving. Their ships drifted aimlessly. Their ground troops froze mid-attack. Thwarked intelligence that had controlled them for centuries was gone. On the bridge of the Resolute Dawn, Tors let out a cry of disbelief. Commander, the Voreth, they're not fighting back, they're just stopped. Lawson watched his tactical display in stunned silence. Everywhere the same story. The enemy had become an army of statues. The central mind is destroyed, he said softly. It worked. The coalition fleet began to advance, destroying the helpless Voreth ships. One by one, on the ground, Zelthra led the charge against enemy positions that no longer defended themselves. It was over. The war that had threatened to destroy all life in the galaxy was over. Lawson opened a channel to the entire fleet. His voice went out to every ship, every soldier, every surviving member of the coalition. The line held, he said. The line will always hold. In the aftermath of the battle, they counted the dead. 60% of the vanguard was gone. thousands of ships destroyed, hundreds of thousands of lives lost, but they had one Grand Marshal Kethovan found. Admiral Cole standing before a memorial display, watching the names of the fallen scroll past, human names, Valoran names, Cathari names, all mixed together, all equal in death. We lost so many, she said quietly. We did, the Grand Marshal agreed, but we saved far more because of what your people did. Today, the galaxy will live. Cole wiped tears from her cheeks. Captain Tanner, Lieutenant Novak, they knew they wouldn't survive. They went anyway. Yes, they did. Kethan placed a gentle hand on her shoulder, a human gesture he had learned to give comfort. That is the gift your species has given us, Admiral. Not just your courage in battle, but your willingness to sacrifice for those you will never meet, for people you will never know, for a future you will never see. Cole looked at him. Is that really so unusual? The Grand Marshal's compound eyes reflected the scrolling names of the dead. In all my centuries of life, I have never encountered it before, not like this, not so pure on the surface of the Vorath home world. Zelthra stood among the ruins of the enemy's last stronghold. Around her, human and Valoran soldiers worked together to secure the area. She thought about Sergeant Bennett, about Private Marsh, about Captain Tanner and Lieutenant Novak, about all the humans who had given everything so that others could live. A young Valoran soldier approached her. Commander, what do we do? Now the war is over. Zelthra looked up at the smoke-filled sky. Somewhere up there, coalition ships were gathering the dead, preparing to bring them home. Now, she said, we remember. We remember what they taught us, and we make sure their sacrifice meant something. The stars were quiet that night. For the first time in years, they held no threat, only memory and gratitude and the promise of peace. 5 years had passed since the war ended and the galaxy had changed. Ambassador Jake Lawson walked through the halls of the Galactic Alliance headquarters, nodding to the beings he passed. Valorans with silver skin, Cathari with their compound eyes, species from 100 different worlds, all sharing the same space, working toward the same future. He still had trouble believing it sometimes. The boy who had grown up on a farm in Nebraska, who had dreamed of the stars when he looked up at the night sky, was now one of the most respected diplomats in the galaxy, not because he was special, but because he was human. The Galactic Coalition had transformed into the Galactic Alliance after the war. Old enemies became friends. Old rivals became partners. And humanity, the youngest species to ever join the interstellar community, had been given a permanent seat on the ruling council. It was an honor that should have taken thousands of years to earn. They had earned it in 2. Ambassador Lawson said, a familiar voice. You look well. He turned to see Grand Marshal Kethavan approaching. The old Cathari had retired from military service but remained an important advisor to the Alliance. He moved more slowly now, his ancient body finally showing its age. Grand Marshal, it's good to see you. I have asked you many times to call me Kethavan. We are old friends, you and I. Lawson smiled. Old habits die hard. They walked together through the headquarters, past walls covered with memorial plaques, names from every species, names of those who had given their lives in the war. Today is the 5th anniversary, Kethavan said. The memorial ceremony at Nathara Prime. I understand you will be Speaking I will, General Torres asked. Me too. Lawson paused at a particular section of the wall, human names. Thousands of them, I'm still not sure what to say. You will find the words. You always do. On earth Zelthra stood before a crowd of thousands. She had lived among humans for 3 years now. Serving as a cultural ambassador, she had walked their cities, eaten their food, learned their languages and their songs. She had become in many ways more human than Valoran. Today she was giving a speech at the annual Remembrance Day ceremony held in a great plaza in the city of New York. Above her, holographic projections showed the faces of the fallen. I came to your world as a stranger, she began, her silver face reflecting the morning light. I came knowing nothing about your people except the stories I had heard in battle, stories of courage, stories of sacrifice, stories of soldiers who kept fighting when all hope was lost. The crowd was silent, human faces, old and young, veterans with medals on their chests, children who had grown up in peace because of what their parents had done, but stories cannot capture the truth. I had to live among you to understand what makes humanity special. 4. She paused, gathering her thoughts. Your people do not live as long as mine. A Valoran can expect 3 centuries, a human perhaps 1. You know, from the moment you are born, that your time is limited, and yet you do not despair. You do not hide from life. Instead, you run toward it. You love fiercely. You fight desperately. You give everything you have because you know you cannot take it with you. Her voice grew stronger. This is your gift to the galaxy, not your weapons or your technology, your spirit, your refusal to accept that anything is impossible, your belief that every life, no matter how short, can matter. In a great library on the Cathari home world, a young scholar named Thalen worked on his latest book. He was a descendant of Ambassador Voran, the diplomat who had knelt before Commander Lawson so many years ago. His life's work was documenting humanity's impact on galactic civilization. It was not a small task. Human music now played in concert halls across 100 worlds. Human literature had been translated into thousands of alien languages. Human philosophy, concepts like democracy, individual rights, and the dignity of all sentient beings had sparked revolutions in societies that had remained unchanged for millennia. But Thalen's favorite discovery was simpler than all of that. It was a phrase, a saying that had spread across the galaxy like wildfire after the war. He had found it in military reports, in diplomatic correspondence, in the private journals of alien soldiers who had fought beside humans. To fight like a human, it meant to never surrender hope, to stand for others even when standing meant death, to believe that tomorrow could be better than today, and to work to make it so. Thelen wrote the phrase in his book and smiled. Of all the gifts humanity had given to the stars, this was perhaps the greatest. Not the memory of what they had done, but the example of who they were. Ambassador Lawson landed on the Kari home world as the sun was setting. Memorial stood on a hill overlooking the city that had nearly been destroyed 5 years ago. It was a simple structure, white stone wall carved with the names of every human who had died defending Cathari civilians. At its center was a statue of 2 figures, a human soldier and a Cathari child, their hands clasped together. Thousands of aliens had gathered for the ceremony, Cathari, families, Valoran veterans, representatives from a dozen other species, all of them standing in silence as Lawson approached the memorial. He carried a single flower in his hand, an earth flower, a white rose from his mother's garden back in Nebraska. He placed it at the base of the statue and stepped back. The silence stretched on. No one moved, no one spoke. Then a small figure pushed through the crowd. Cathari child, no more than 10 years old. By human standards. She walked up to Lawson and looked at him with her compound eyes. "Excuse me," she said in careful English. "I have a question." Lawson knelt down to meet her eyes. "Of course, ask anything. My teacher told us about the war. She told us about the humans who died to save our world." The child tilted her head. "Why did they do it? Your people didn't know us. You had only been in the coalition for 5 years. Why did you fight so hard for strangers?" The question hung in the air. Around them, thousands of beings listened for the answer. Lawson was quiet for a long moment. He thought about the crew of the Resolute Dawn who had held the line for 9 hours against impossible odds. He thought about Sergeant Bennett and his squad fighting for 11 days behind enemy lines. He thought about Private Marsh running toward his death so that others could live. He thought about Captain Tanner and Lieutenant Novak guiding their ship into the heart of the enemy without hesitation, because he said finally, "When we look at the stars, we don't see strangers, we see family we haven't met yet." The child considered this. "That's a nice thought. It's more than a thought, it's who we are. We're human. We protect our own." And now, he gestured at the crowd around them, "Now you're our own too." The ceremony continued as darkness fell. Speakers from a dozen species shared their memories of the war. Veterans embraced former enemies. Children placed flowers at the base of the memorial until it looked like a garden. Lawson stood at the edge of the crowd watching. General Megan Torres, his old tactical officer, now one of the most powerful military leaders in the Alliance, came to stand beside him. "Good speech," she said. "I just told the truth." She nodded. "I got a report this morning. Intelligence intercepted communications from a system on the edge of the galaxy. A species we've never contacted before. They've been monitoring our broadcast since the war." And Torres smiled. "They want to join the Alliance. They said they've been studying us for years, trying to decide if we were worth trusting. They said the humans convinced them." Lawson looked up at the stars. Somewhere out there, beings he had never met had watched humanity fight and die for species that were strangers to them. And it had inspired them. "What are they called?" he asked. "Thy first contact is scheduled for next month. The council wants you to lead the delegation." "Why me?" Torres put a hand on his shoulder. "Because you're human, Jake, and that means something now, across the entire galaxy. It means something." The stars were beautiful that night. They stretched across the sky like scattered diamonds, each one holding the promise of new worlds, new peoples, new futures. In barracks and temples, in homes and on warships, beings of 100 different forms whispered the same truth to their children. To fight alongside humanity is to know what honor truly means, and to carry that reverence across the stars. The memorial ceremony ended. The crowds dispersed, but the white rose remained at the base of the statue, its petals glowing softly in the starlight, a gift From Earth, a promise from humanity, symbol of what the galaxy had become. Not through conquest or fear, but through sacrifice and love. Jake Lawson was the last to leave. He stood before the memorial for a long time, looking at the names carved in stone. Friends, strangers, heroes. We did it, he said quietly. We actually did it. The stars answered with their ancient light. And somewhere across the vast distances of space, a new species prepared to meet the humans they had heard so much about, prepared to learn what it truly meant to fight alongside humanity, prepared to find their own honor among the stars.